All right, we can get started. Thank you guys for coming. This is for the DevOps Mid-Cities user group. My name is Ryan Salmon. I'm a technical recruiter here at Paladin. This is our website right here. We're hosting you guys. Thank you very much for coming. Hopefully more people can come next time too. You guys meet up monthly now, I guess. So refreshments provided. It's always nice. Just to give you guys a little bit of detail about us, we have several hundred opportunities available to you guys, as well as many recruiters across the nation. So if you guys ever are looking, know somebody looking, definitely send them our way. That's all the spiel I'll give you about that. But yeah, and then the other thing that we do want to let you guys know about is our gift camp. That's actually a really great cause. We got about 13 different charities that project managers, developers, they all come together and they rebuild different websites for the different charities. So it's a real great event. Definitely look into it. You can check it out on our website, LinkedIn, anything like that. And there you go. I'll give the floor to you guys.
Okay, cool.
Thank you.
We also have another sponsor as well. It's Pluralsight. So you can see the website there. They have gifted us with some monthly access to their online training, and so we'll be giving out some prizes that they've provided. So thanks a lot to Pluralsight as well, and thanks a lot also to GameStop for allowing Paul to come speak to us tonight. So I think that's all I've got. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Paul, and then you can go ahead and get started.
All right. Actually, why don't you fire up the slides for me, if you don't mind. Oh, there we go.
Yep.
All right, so lost my connection here. Let's see. There we go. All right, so tonight's presentation is entitled Sail or Fail, Navigating Automation Pitfalls. So let's start off with, who is this guy? Well, my name is Paul Grizzaffi. I'm the automation architect, manager, and developer for GameStop's online technology division. My entire career has been spent developing automation tools and frameworks for various fields, telecom, finance, and now retail. If you want to look me up, you can find me on LinkedIn, or you can shoot me an email over at pgrizzaffi@gmail.com. Okay, so normally in a presentation you would get an overview at this point, but I prefer an anti-view. Instead of telling you what you are going to see, I'll tell you what you're not going to see. So what you're not going to see is some sort of indictment of your current automation initiative. If you're doing something that works, keep doing it. I just want to give you some other things to think about when you start to evolve your program, or if you move on to another position or a different technology. This is not the one ring to rule them all. There is no one right answer to an automation initiative. It's not ad hoc, but it is very situation dependent. So QA guys, developers, this is not a mallet for beating on management saying this is how we need to do our automation. And conversely, for management, this is not for beating on your QA team to say, why aren't we automated yet? And it's not meant to discourage or overwhelm. There was a lot of topics. Well, there are several topics here. Some are big. Some may seem overwhelming at first. You don't have to do everything at once. You don't even have to do everything. There might be things that don't apply to you. There might be things that apply to you that I just don't have on this list. And this is also not a how-to. This is not a recipe for here's exactly how to build a successful automation program. Again, these are primarily things for you to think about, things for you to be familiar with, so that when you are faced with a situation, you are going to roll out a new initiative, there's some things that you've got in mind. So you've got sort of a head start on what to think about. All right, so let's go. First is, our process isn't working, automation's going to fix that, right? Well, that's almost guaranteed for a ride on the Failboat. So, automation is process rehabilitation? In general, no. If your process is broken, then your automation program is going to be broken as well. You have to know your job. You have to know what you're doing. You have to know how to test what you're testing. You have to know your domain. And you have to know your process. If your process is a mess, that might be the place to start and say, hey, we need to revise what our development and our QA process is so that we can even automate. There are some tools that can give you structure around automation, kind of give you some ideas and say, hey, maybe there's some best practices here and that'll help enforce it. But if the best practices are not appropriate to whatever you're doing in your organization, then they may not be best practices for you. But like I said, it can be a good excuse for process rehabilitation. Hey, we know we have to automate, but we can't because our process is broken. This is our excuse to fix the process before we can go on. So, an example. At one of the companies I've worked for, the manual test cases had questionable coverage. So, if your manual test cases are effectively broken, anything you automate based off that manual test script will therefore also be broken and possibly broken worse. So again, it will be a good excuse to say, hey, let's audit our manual test cases. Let's make sure they're covering what they need to cover. Let's make sure there's enough information in there for us to automate. By going through, culling those, developing new ones, and refining the ones that you're going to keep, you're going to be in a lot better position to actually automate. Okay, writing test scripts is hard. Record and playback is the best way to go. So another ride on the Failboat, well, maybe not so fast. So record and playback in general has its place. But you have to be mindful of re-recording. What happens is a lot of times you become dependent on the recorder, particularly if your audience for the tool and for the initiative that you have is not extremely technical. Perhaps they know their domain well, they know their QA life very well, but they're not real technical when it comes to developing software. We get reliant on the record and playback, then, hey, we have a new feature set coming in, you have to re-record everything, which is a problem or it's not. But what you do is you incur additional costs there because you wrote those test cases once or you recorded them once, you proved them out, then you use them. Perhaps you recovered that cost, perhaps you did not. It's a smaller safety net. A lot of times you can think of a regression suite as a safety net. Hey, I can go and mess with all this code, add new features. I can run my regression and make sure I, at the very least, haven't broken anything. If you're changing your code and your regression suite, then you have to go back and validate that the regression suite is actually testing what you want to test. So therefore, there's additional effort there that's sometimes hidden when you think about what your initiative is going to be. Can be very valuable as a starting point. Hey, I need to figure out how to interact with this API and send it some data. Recording playback is a great way to start that. Do your recording playback, see what was generated. Once you understand what was generated, then you can go and hand modify and hand build. There's a company out there, I'm not going to say which one, but I saw a demo by them a couple of weeks ago, and it's sort of this type of mindset where their record is strictly record, it's not playback. And it records into a handful of languages, commodity programming languages, and it gives you the skeleton of what you would need to do. You can add in data-driven tests from CSV files, you can add control constructs and such at that point, and it gives you a lot more control over what you're doing. You understand what the APIs are doing, and it gives you that head start, that start point to say, okay, I don't have to start from the stone, knives, and bearskins here. Record and playback can be good for very high churn and very low churn. If every release you're making major changes to your API or to your UI, if you're going to have to change your test cases every release anyway, go with the cheapest way to actually get the test cases done, because you'll run them multiple times throughout one release cycle probably, so you'll gain a little bit of that effort back. Also very low churn. If your interface is really static and you're not changing very much in the front end, record and playback for the front end might be really valuable because you get the test cases written in a hurry, you prove them out once, not a lot changes on that front end, so you can keep turning that crank and recovering that effort that you put in. Consider tools that make maintenance easy. One of the things that typically gets sort of glossed over or forgotten about when starting an automation initiative is maintenance. And there's actually a slide that we're going to see in a little bit about when you're done with your automation program. You're going to have to maintain, you're going to have to make changes, you're going to have to upgrade. you have to think about what that's going to be like and account for that and do things to make your life easier downstream. Because if it costs you X dollars to automate the first time and it costs you almost X the second time, well, they're going to ride me out of here on a rail for sure, because that's not good business. So for example, what we're doing at GameStop right now is we're layering our automation technology, and we're using Ruby to do it. All right, so what is this layering? Here's a high-level overview of the layers that we have in our system. At the bottom, we have what we call the systems under test. And in my world, that would be GameStop's e-commerce site, the Impulse PC download commerce site, the client for Impulse downloads, and we've got an Android app. So some of the raw tools are actually the things that we either build or buy or steal, and by steal I mean open source, to drive those particular technologies. If there's something out there that's fairly commodity, that's doing a good job, that is cost-benefit for you, it doesn't make a lot of sense to reinvent that wheel. So some of the things we're using is for web-based things. We're using WebSpec and Selenium. For services, we're using Mechanize and Savon, which are Ruby gems or like libraries. We've got some proprietary stuff, particularly around the client, which is it's HTML5 and JavaScript. And then for our Android application, we're using a third-party tool called Robotium to actually drive the Android piece. Now, the next layer is where we start to see some of this payback on investment. The tool abstraction layer. That layer serves several purposes. One, it literally abstracts the specific tool away from the test cases. The test cases are where your business logic is. The test cases are where some of the nastier things about your product live. It's the contract with your software. So you should not have to change your test cases unless your software changes, because then the contract has changed. You'd prefer not to change your test cases just because you made a tool change. That's not good downstream maintenance. So what we do is we have a layer called finders. Primarily, we're dealing with web at this point, so it'll be finding HTML elements either on the website or in the Impulse client that we can interact with them. We can interrogate their state, set their value, click on them, but it's abstracted away so that we're not married to the tool at the test case, at the business logic point. And we have some general software engineering concepts where we've abstracted away some of the nastier bits, and we can provide a better interface for our audience, for our user community. Then above that, we have the domain-specific language layer. And I'm kind of abusing that term, domain-specific language. It's not something like Cucumber or Fit or Fitness, where it's sort of English-like and a non-tech person can write it. But it is written in the jargon and the vernacular of the user group. So if you think about the Finder layer as actions, find me a login button and type into the password field, well then what's at the DSL layer is more behaviors. A set of actions make a behavior. So I want to log in. I want to empty my cart. I want to change my password. Those would all be different DSL layer abstractions. And we can have a different one per property, per user group. So we've got a set of QA guys that work on the GameStop e-commerce. They've got their own jargon for their DSL. Same with the Impulse guys, same with the mobile guys. And then above that, we have the test framework, which in this case we're using RSpec. RSpec is, I'm kind of abusing it. RSpec is the de facto standard for Ruby unit testing. We've just sort of adapted it to functional testing. So instead of calling into mocks and low-level APIs, we call into our higher-level finders and DSLs. So I'll give you a quick code comparison. We're not going to delve too far into the code itself, but using WebSpec directly, this is sort of what a login would look like. You would say to the browser, hey, go and find me the A tag whose class name matches ATS login, and then click on it. So as you can see, very brittle. Things that change on the website will directly affect what's in the test case. Additionally, going to log in about 60% of the test cases. So if you've got 200 test cases, that's 60% of 200 test cases you have to go and change when that HTML code changes. And then you get further and further down the list here. Our QA guys, really good QA guys. They know the domain, they know QA, they've got some anywhere from rudimentary to fairly advanced coding skills. But the tool should not be their job, the tool should help them do their job. So we want to abstract away any of this, what I call stunt coding. Anything that is going to require digging through source code of the product, complex looping and jumping constructs. We want to keep that away from them because they shouldn't have to waste their time doing that. They need to spend their time making sure the product has good quality. So if we go to a Finder equivalent, it's basically a line-for-line change, or should I say a line-for-line swap in. But you can see it looks a lot more like what you would talk about. Hey, go and find me the login link and click on it. And then on the email field, set the value to my email address, set the password, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Much more friendly to a user, much easier to write test cases. We've abstracted away the specifics of what the website looks like from a code standpoint, so we get some reusability there. Hey, that class name changed on the login link. Let's change it in the library, release the library, everybody gets to change. No need to revalidate the code, no need to update all the code. But you still have the same problem. We've got, what, say 8 or 9 steps there. Oh wait, now there's a 10th step in login. You have to go and update 60% of 200 test cases. Instead, what we can do is we can embed all of that into a DSL, abstract away the actions into a behavior. If one thing changes at login, we change it in the login DSL, and then all the test cases get it the next time. But there is a bit of a black art to the DSLs. If you'll notice in this particular example, we click the login link before we perform the login steps. That's because those login steps are reusable across different paths through the site. So it's sort of a value assessment on how much you put into a DSL. The more you put in, the more abstraction you have, but the more specific that particular DSL needs to be, and you won't be able to reuse it as much without passing in a lot of parameters and such. So again, considerations that are not hard and fast, but just things you need to think about as you're going through this process. So we've talked about a lot of things here. We've looked at a little code. Do I really need to do all of this stuff? No. You really don't need to do all of this. But it can be a good idea if you don't know what your technology roadmap is. Hey, I know that today we're working on this type of front end with this type of API. I know we're going to acquire company X and bring them in and fold them in. I know that the way our industry is going, we're moving from technology X to technology Y. If you don't know what your technology roadmap is, you may consider doing this layered approach, this abstraction approach, because what it allows you to do is extend your framework with additional capabilities without having to rewrite what you have already and without having to maintain 2 different frameworks. If you can't or don't want to be bound to a single tool, this is particularly interesting around anything that's third party that you purchase. Some of the bigger tools, once you're in there, you're kind of in there. And that's because you write your test cases strictly to their API, using their programming language. Eventually, you get a big backlog of these test cases, and if you need to move, it can be a very, very costly proposition to move, because not only do you have to write all your new scripts, you have to port all of your old scripts, or you have to maintain 2 tool sets and figure out which ones you're going to use here, which ones are going to use there. It can be expensive if you can't or don't want to be bound to a single tool. If there's no tool for all of your cross-technology needs, if today you are a SOAP services tester or SOAP services shop, and you SOAP UI all day long, great, 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 great tool. You can script in it. You can do some sort of record and playback in it. Oh, wait a minute, now we need to interface with a different API, or we need to interface with a website. SOAP UI is not going to do that for you. So you've either got 2 separate test cases in two separate test frameworks, or you're going to have to take all of your services code and port it into the one that can also handle the browser. So if you layer things out, you can just add pieces to your framework without having to, again, have these two separate frameworks to worry about. If you can afford to invest, there's upfront work here. There is upkeep. There's just work. You're not going to get this for free. It's going to take time. It's going to take some expertise, and it's going to take some. You're going to make some mistakes along the way, and you're going to need to refactor as you go. If you can't afford to invest, or if you're unwilling to invest for business reasons or whatever, perhaps going this layered route is not necessarily the best approach. But again, if you don't have the right expertise to do this, then if you're not taking a ride on the Failboat, you're at least going to not excel quite as quickly as you may want to. Okay, so we must automate every aspect of our testing, otherwise we will not be successful. That's what we call boiling the ocean, and it's a good way to get another ticket on the SS Failboat, primarily around expectations and organizational funding. So, a lot of times we're looking at and looking for the all-or-nothing approach. I'm going to start at this end where the user is, and I'm going to go all the way to where my fulfillment system is, and if I can't do all of that, it's not worth automating. And that's not necessarily true, because in general, any benefit that you get is better than no benefit. Consider things like automation assist. If you can't, you're unwilling, you're unable, you don't have the technology to automate end-to-end, that's not necessarily a problem. Consider things like, hey, I can't verify that things got into the database. I don't have technology for that. I don't have permissions for that. But what I can do is I can generate orders, or I can create new users, and then do some visual validation, some human interaction on that. Take some of that crank-turning stuff out of the way from you. And again, consider helper tools, things that turn the crank for you. Computers are great at doing the same thing over and over. Humans are not. That's automation. Go for bang for the buck. It should kind of go without saying, but sometimes we get lost in the value of what we're doing. Things that are going to be valuable right now, right up front, tend to go for those first. Consider the drug dealer approach. You know, the first one's free, but the next one's going to cost you. That is valuable when you are ramping up your first initiative, or you're trying to get some buy-in from your senior executives. If you don't like the drug dealer approach, you can go with the Gillette Mach 3 approach, where they send you the free razor in the mail, and then when it gets dull, you go to the store and you buy the $17 replacement pack of 3 blades. The idea is, hey, we can overwork. We can go in our off hours. We can develop something as a proof of concept that says this is going to be valuable, but you can't possibly keep that up. Use it as an approach to gain funding, to gain some approval, to get some head nods so that you can actually go forward and make some real progress. It demos well. Along with bang for the buck, you've got several things that are equally valuable. Go for the one that's going to be most impressive to look at. Again, when you're trying to build consensus to get some momentum behind your program, for whatever reason, people like flashy things. If it moves a GUI on the screen, it's far more impressive to the average person than, hey, I just ran 10,000 services tests in 30 seconds. Aren't you impressed? It's just better to look at, and people will be a lot more excited about it, a lot more interested in it. And tout the tool. If you've got something that is valuable, something that's saving you time, or is finding issues, or demonstrating abnormal behavior, go ahead and make a big deal out of that. That's good. It gets people excited. It gets people interested. People want to be involved in processes that are doing well and that are providing value. So, for an example, at GameStop, when I got there, we needed to be able to crank out a bunch of orders for the commerce server replacement. So we didn't really have a way to go end-to-end yet. We didn't have all the database stuff plumbed in, and the order management system that we currently had was being replaced, and the new one wasn't in place yet, so we couldn't really interface directly to it. So what we did was we just said, great, we're going to use our browser, our browser tooling and just rip through this list of products in this CSV file. We're going to dump the order numbers out, let it run overnight over 2 or 3 machines, come in the morning and manually verify the orders. Still manual work, but work you were going to have to do anyway, but all that other stuff happened overnight. You didn't have to wait on it. You didn't have to do it yourself. Was what we got out of that the amount of money that we put into it? Maybe, maybe not. But what it gave you is less opportunity cost. What were you able to do because you didn't have to turn the crank and build all those order numbers up? You got more testing done. You got different automation done. There are a lot of ways to skin that cat, and opportunity costs is a really good one. Okay, once we write the automated test scripts, automation's complete, right? That's a guaranteed ride on the Failboat again, because care and feeding of an automation program is a continuing investment for continuing return. And it really is an investment. If you take $1,000 and put it in the stock market today, maybe you get your money back tomorrow, maybe you don't. And it may go down for a while before you start recouping that. And that's the same idea with automation. You need to invest up front because it's not going to pay for itself on that first time you run those test cases. Probably not the second time either. By about the third time, you're going to start seeing return on that investment where you did not have to rebuild all that stuff. You'd have to rerun all that stuff manually. But you have to keep it up. You have to keep it current. If you are evolving your product, you have to evolve your automation. At the very least, you need to add new scenarios. And adding new scenarios means you're going to run it longer. You have to worry about new operating system upgrades, new hardware upgrades. You have to account for all of that in your program. Again, consider layering your framework. That can ease some of this care and feeding and maintenance. And always account for your downstream maintenance. There will be tool upkeep, tool upgrades. If you're third-party vendor purchased, you've got license and support fees. And you've got script parity with your product. Very seldom do you have a product where you just put it out and you're done with it. You're always fixing something. You're always adding to it to keep it current, to keep it better than your competitor. You're going to have to keep working on the automation. It's not a one-and-done kind of thing. Here's an example from one of the other companies I worked at. Due to some budget constraints, there was a decision made that there would be no work on the base of the automation platform unless it could have a business case. And a business case was very specific. It either had to show cost avoidance, cost reduction, or productivity gain. Upgrading the operating system was none of those. I could not show you either of those, but I could explain to you what was going to happen if we didn't do it. That was not considered a legitimate business case, so we didn't do the project. One day, one of the product organizations came over and said, hey, we need to deploy, I don't know, 3, 5, 6 new test heads out there. Great, let's order some hardware. Oh, wait, that hardware doesn't run that version of the operating system we're on. And we can't get hardware that runs that version of the operating system because of drive controllers and kernel modifications and such. So those guys had to wait until we could actually do the operating system upgrade. So if you don't plan this stuff in, you can find yourself in a bind at a very inconvenient time. So this automation tool is what we must use for all of our testing. And again, you can find a ride on the Failboat that way as well. So let's talk about hammers and nails. Everyone's familiar with the hammer and nails analogy, which is if all you have is a hammer, then everything looks like a nail. That's not a good way to approach your tooling. You need to think about the right tool for the job. But it's okay to hit the nails. If all you have is a hammer, look for the nails. Hit those first. Then we'll see if we need a screwdriver or a socket wrench, or we'll see what the next thing we need. Use nails instead of screws. If all you have is a hammer and you're building something, perhaps use more nails than you normally would have instead of some screws because, well, then you can use that tool to accomplish that task correctly. Again, layers for tool integration and cross-technology testings. So if you can't do everything at once, pick something. Go for the high-value proposition. Then start adding in the second to highest value proposition by adding technology under that layer that we talked about. Avoid the three of clubs mentality. Three of clubs mentality is a story, actually it's a magic trick that I'm really, really horrible at, so I'm not going to try and do it here. But the idea is that a professor of mine gave someone in class a sealed envelope with a card in it and said, hey, the whole class is going to guess what that card is. And he started off with, hey, red or black? And whoever said red, you would say, okay, we're going to throw out all the reds, we're going to keep the blacks. And then he would say, okay, odd or even? And people would say, odd. Okay, then we're going to keep all the odds, we're going to throw out all the evens. Knowing what the answer was going to be at the end and throwing out the thing that he didn't want to hear. Tend to do the same thing with tools. Hey, we heard that this tool was the best one, so we're going to sort of, not intentionally, but sort of unintentionally fold the data to make that our actual decision. Yes, our decision came up to be the market leader or the enterprise class, or whatever it is. Just kind of be leery of that and be aware that it's very easy to do that. And another example of the hammer and nails analogy, again with the browsers at GameStop. First thing we did was the browser, because it demoed well, because there was high interest in getting that done, and there was high effort in actually doing that testing. So great, now we've got the browser where we can make orders and we can add new users. Killer. What do we do next? Well, we can make the orders, but we can't actually go and talk to the order management system and see if they made it through. Okay, there's some additional work there. Or what we can do is go through the other browser-based things. Okay, let's go with order history. Let's go with forgotten password. Let's go with everything we can do with the browser, and we'll worry about the downstream stuff later because we don't have all of the browser stuff licked yet. Okay, automation is a QA job, right? Another ride on the failboat? Maybe. If not, then at least you're going to struggle a little bit if you're not getting some good partnerships across. And this one's really apropos for this organization as well, because when we talk about whose job is this anyway, it really works best as a cross-functional team effort. And cross-functional meaning everybody. QA, dev, automation, ops, release management. Ops, you're going to need equipment. You're going to need a lab. You're going to need virtual machines. Release management, hey, maybe I want a continuous integration environment. Maybe I want some stuff automatically run when we push out to production to make sure we have just basic sanity. We need to involve all these guys in this initiative so that, if nothing else, they know what we're up to. So when we come and say, hey, I need 30 IP addresses, they don't look at us like we have 7 heads. There are some implementations that can be easier to automate than others. So if you're having that discussion with the development organization, or I'm used to talking to QA guys, if QA and the development organization are having that discussion and making it as a business decision, hey, if you implement this way, here's what the total cost is, including QA. If you make this other decision, here's what the total cost is, including QA. Things that are easier to automate, obviously, are going to cost less to automate, and then therefore you can spend more time automating the value stuff and then having your humans do the stuff that you can't automate yet. There's some implementations that can't or just shouldn't be automated. Hey, this is legacy code. We know we're going to evolve it. Maybe that's not the right thing to start with for your automation. Maybe you never automate. Maybe you only automate the new stuff. Again, those are value propositions that you need this whole team together to be able to make those decisions. It is best to have early QA and automation participation. People that are in Agile, Scrum type of organizations, they should be getting this already. Hey, here's our story, here's our acceptance criteria. The QA guy should be asking not only, hey, how am I going to test this? They should be saying, hey, how am I going to automate this? And when we have new features and when we have bug fixes, hey, if you change that, we have to change the automation as well. We have to change the scripts. The contract has been changed. That needs to be taken account into your sizing, in your effort estimates, and into your relative sizings. Feedback to loop and risk-reward decisions. Hey, this decision was made by the development. This decision was made by the team. When we got to automate, it wound up costing a lot more, or we couldn't automate because we learned something. Everybody needs to know that so that we don't remake that same decision and sort of shoot ourselves in the foot in our automation initiative. For example, again at GameStop, the Safari initiative that we have for automating the Safari browser versus the Impulse client, which is our PC download client. For Safari, we kind of did the automation in a vacuum. A lot of legacy code. We're working around what was there already, weren't really in a position to exert influence. IE is great about letting you actually click things. Mozilla, Firefox, Safari, it's more of a simulated click. So there are certain things you cannot click in Safari if it's not written a certain way. So we worked around that as best we could. New software release comes out. Hey, some of the stuff we could click on before, we can't click on now. It's because it was implemented differently. They've changed out the implementation, so we lost some automation coverage. Whereas with the client, we were in a greenfield. They were rewriting some of this, so me and my team were able to, my team and I, were able to go in and meet with these guys and say, look, what are the technologies you're going to use? Let us go and do some investigation and at least be able to weigh in on here's what the automation is going to cost. It may still be the right decision to do things that are harder to automate or can't be automated because of business reasons, but at least it was all out in the forefront. At least everyone had a say and had a head nod to say, we understand what we're doing here. Okay, automation will fix all of our quality problems, right? Again, failboat, but around expectations. Regarding magic bullets, there are no magic bullets. But automation's a really big bullet. It's important to think about the fact that by design, automation does not find bugs. It confirms behavior. So you tell your script what the behavior needs to be, and it'll validate that for you all day long. Everything you tell it to check, it will check. Conversely, anything you don't tell it to check, it will not check because it doesn't know to do that. So it's confirming the behavior that you said you want out of this system. If you tell it the wrong thing, or if you tell it something incomplete, it's not going to do as good a job as you thought it was going to. Automation is really good for well-defined and repeatable tests. Computers are great at doing the same thing over and over and over, changing data, running it again. Humans are bad at that. They get bored. We're human. We make mistakes. It's fat finger. Oh, wait a minute. I realized I made a mistake. Now I have to do it again. That's another 10 minutes, and here's another 5 minutes, and eventually it's an hour, and it's 2 hours. Humans are good for what I call guerrilla testing. They can do things that computers just don't do well now, or at least commodity things don't do now. Hey, wait a minute. I noticed that that thing changed, and that wasn't there last time. Computer's not going to know that unless you told it to notice that it changed or that it wasn't there. A human can pick that up. So manual testing is important, but it's important to use it for the right thing because it can be expensive. And again, it goes without saying, but don't automate it. There's no value. And for example, Impulse Deal of the Day. When you download our Impulse client, there's an option to turn on what they call Deal of the Day. If there's a Deal of the Day, it'll give you a little pop-up that says, by the way, today, this game is on sale for this much off. Well, with the automation, you can tell, yes, a window popped up. Yes, it's populated. You might be able to tell what the contents are supposed to be based on maybe some HTML, maybe some window names or something, but you can't really guarantee what's in that window. You can't guarantee if it's a graphic what the percentage off is going to be, and if you click on it, if it's all graphic, you can't tell that it took you to the right place. So if you're going to have to manually test that anyway, why bother automating it? You're going to come up with a heuristic that's right 80 or 90% of the time. You're going to get false positives and false negatives, and you're still going to have to manually test it. There's no value. Don't automate that. Okay, last couple of slides. There's some takeaways I'd like you to have from the presentation today. And all of these takeaways apply to build, buy, and whatever you steal. And again, steal is open source. I like to say that because it's fun. Beware of incorrect expectations. If you think back to all the topics I've presented, Most of them are around expecting the wrong thing with your automation, whether it's end-to-end right away, whether it's going to solve all your problems, whether it's a one and done. Incorrect expectations are going to be problems for you. Make business decisions with business data. Getting the team together, understanding, yes, we're going to implement this way because we can automate, or no, we can't implement that way and we can't automate because of a business driver. Take the politics and the religion out of it, make it a money discussion. Everybody can kind of grudgingly come together and be equally dissatisfied over that. They must be in sync with your long-term goals. For example, I have a legacy system and I know I'm going to replace that. If I know I'm going to replace that, I probably shouldn't spend much, if any, effort automating that legacy system. Why? Because it's not in sync with my long-term goal of end-of-lifing that system and going with something new. My effort might well be better spent just automating the new thing. Generally, something's better than nothing. You've got to keep the return on investment and the price tag and the opportunity costs in mind. But in general, if it's providing you benefit and it's not doing everything you want, it's still benefit. Don't swat a fly with a Buick. If you've got a small problem and you can solve it with a small tool or a small initiative, just solve it with a small tool or a small initiative and grow it if you need to. There's no need to buy an enterprise class tool to generate a few thousand user entries in a database. A script guy can do that for you. And think solutions and strategies, not just tools. So often in automation initiatives, the first thing people think about is, how am I going to automate? I've got a website, so what's the best website automation tool? Well, what do you want to get out of that? Are you looking for reduction in headcount? Are you looking for, hey, I'm testing this much, but I have to test this much, so I need to get more coverage? What's your goal? Figure that out, put a strategy around it, and then start looking at your technologies. Again, make business decisions first. And don't forget about the downstream maintenance. It can be a killer if you're not expecting it. And if you're not planning for it, then you may incur some that you could have avoided up front. So unfortunately, the implementation of this is left as an exercise to the reader, simply because, again, it's not ad hoc, but it is very situationally dependent on what a good approach is and whether these considerations are appropriate to you or not. So I'll open it up for questions in the room or online or whichever.
I have a few questions. Do you have any questions? So I guess my first question is, how do you start? Like, did you immediately start planning to build an automation test equivalent of your code base, or did that just kind of, you get to the point where you're like, okay, now our code's big enough to where we need to start automating? Or is there a little bit of both? Or?
When I came into GameStop, it was basically greenfield for the organizations I was responsible for, which is the online technology stuff. They had a touch of automation here and there, but nothing that was really being used, so it was more of a, hey, we're dying. We have this much testing to do, and we're getting this much of it done. We need help, and throwing bodies at it is not, it's not sustainable. We need to automate this. So that's coming into an established organization, established product where there was nothing before. The flip side of that is, okay, I'm going to build something new. Absolutely start your automation at the beginning. Start small. Pick something open source that's going to get most of what you want done accomplished for you. Add some things if you want, because what will happen is you'll never get to the good time to start the automation. Then you'll have 10 servers with 100,000 lines of code, and then, uh-oh, how am I going to test this? If you think about how to automate, and not just at the functional level, at the unit test level like we were talking about earlier, you will write your code differently. You will write your code, and you will design your code so that it can be tested, because that's a priority for you. That becomes intrinsic in the work that you do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Another question, actually this is something that, you know, I'm interested in security, and there's other cross-cutting concerns across the application, like maybe performance under stress and those types of things.
Okay.
Do you guys, or you in particular, do you have any comments on when you test something, do you test strictly for usability or correctness, or do you also test other scenarios like let's do a security or penetration testing, or try to automate that somehow?
I'm primarily tasked with functional test and accomplishing that, and then consulting on other things. In general, if what you're testing is a commodity like web, like old established telephony protocols, going to a third party to get that framework and that interface is probably going to be your best bet, because those guys, that's all they do is they sit there and figure out how to squeeze another millisecond out of the processing. Can you write your own performance test? Absolutely. Can you write your own security test suite? Absolutely. But there are experts out there that have things that you can take and purchase, and your money may well be better spent there. Again, business decisions, see what they're offering, see what it costs, see how much you need. But in general, my rule of thumb is for things like that, it's best to look at third parties first and see what your options are before you build something in-house. You can still layer it, particularly the security stuff, because the security stuff is not really performance and time dependent like the performance stuff is. You can layer some of your performance stuff, particularly in today's processors and today's faster languages, but you still may incur some overhead depending on what you're doing in your layers. So you may need more processing power to accomplish that. You may need more machines, more RAM, just whatever it kind of is. I would suggest that you start with something that you have not written. Prototype it, throw it out there, see if it's doing something close that you need for it to do, and then make a decision on that. That's one thing I didn't really touch on here, is that automation, in my experience, is best doled out incrementally. Let's do a little, throw it to the wall, let's see what sticks. Okay, we're getting a lot of traction with number 2, let's jettison 1 and 3 and develop 2 and then go to 4.
And one more question, and this might, you don't have to reveal anything you don't want to reveal, of course, but
Sure.
Do you guys test on live data, or do you test on a live environment, or do you have a completely separate, like a test environment with bogus data, or how do you structure your tests?
It is
with actual data.
For the functional test of the products and the websites and the client and all. We have multiple environments we test in. We've got a dev environment, we have a QA environment. Some of the organizations have a smoke environment, which is sort of straddles the line between test and production. When we do a live push, we actually do, well, one of the organizations does actually do their functional test against it while the site's down. They will run like smoke, say, hey, does this basic stuff basically work? So that's getting done while they're manually checking a bunch of stuff. So as far as live data, some of that stuff, I don't really know exactly what they do. I know they take snapshots of the production database from time to time and put them into QA so that the data is not necessarily matching, but if there's something weird that got injected, at least QA's environment's going to have something similar to it.
Mm-hmm. Any questions?
For a small organization that's just getting started in automation, what open source tools would you suggest to scale?
What are you doing?
So it's a web environment, so we do want to automate usability and make sure that everything is working up to spec.
If you're just getting your feet wet, and it sounds like you've got some competent developers, even with the QA mindset, I would not be afraid to go with something that does scripting. Selenium seems to be, I won't say the de facto standard, but it's certainly high use by organizations that are not going to use your QTPs and your Borlands and your some of your other bigger, higher process, especially if you're trying to figure out what your needs are. Selenium's open source, so it doesn't cost you any out-of-pocket money. It obviously costs you have to train yourself and build your scripts and your abstraction layers, but everything costs something, right? These days I would start with Selenium simply because there's a lot of traction, a lot of people are asking questions, a lot of people are answering questions in that community. For services testing, particularly around SOAP, there's a free version of SOAP UI. So if you're just doing services in a vacuum without worrying about interactions across technologies, that's a good way to go as well.
So it's a very good talk. Very good.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. No questions online or?
No.
No? All right. Well, thanks everybody. Appreciate your time.